purpose of this presentation is to answer common questions from the previously released Episode 1 Franchise Buyer Beware presentation. To get the most value from this presentation, it is recommended that Episode 1 Franchise Buyer Beware has been viewed or listened to. Any references to legislation or the franchising code in this presentation are specific to Australia, and people from other countries should understand how specific legislation or their own country's codes or requirements apply to them. All viewers or listeners should complete their own research and investigations and not take any specific action based on this presentation alone. The opinions expressed throughout this presentation are those of the presenter, and while well researched and gained through decades of industry experience, they do not necessarily represent the opinions of FMS Support Services. Unless specifically mentioned, no assumptions should be made about the identity of any individuals, franchisees, or franchisors referenced in this presentation. Welcome. This is Sean Butcher again from FMS Support Services. Now, this will be a much shorter presentation than the initial marathon Franchise Buyer Beware presentation. It is a quick Q&A follow-up session to cover some of the common questions received from the recent presentation. Firstly, however, I'd like to say thanks to everybody who watched or listened in the first week or so. There have been over 2,000 downloads so far across different platforms, which is about 2,000 more than I expected. Also, a massive thanks to everybody that shared or left a like or a 5-star review, as that really helps. Subscriber numbers are also slowly growing, so thanks to everybody that has subscribed in anticipation of future presentations. If you think you're going to get future value from these presentations, then please subscribe, as it is very helpful, and there will be plenty more coming up as I get around to it. So anyway, let's kick it off with the first question. This one received from quite a few people. So after all of that, should I buy a franchise? Sure, just do your research, take it seriously, and buy the right one. As I mentioned, Australia is a really tough country to do business in, but the success rate of franchise businesses is far greater than the average. However, those statistics do not apply equally across all franchise networks, which was the whole purpose of the presentation, really, to try and assist people in determining whether any franchise they are looking at joining is a good or a bad decision. Next question. Can you name some good franchises to buy? Unfortunately, no, for a few reasons. Firstly, with thousands to choose from, I certainly don't know them all and wouldn't want to miss any that deserve a mention. Things also tend to change, and what might be a great franchisor now, when this is being recorded, may not be a great franchisor 2 years from now after a change in management or direction. And finally, I definitely don't want to venture down the other path of naming the not-so-great franchises publicly either, because I just don't feel like being sued, and I also live in hope that they too will change at some point. Next question. How do some of these franchisors stay in business and keep finding new franchisees? Yeah, good question. And from my observations, there are a few different factors to consider. Firstly, I think many franchisors eventually do run out of new franchisees. People tend to forget about all the franchise brands that have quietly died out over the years, but there have been a lot of them. Secondly, I'd say there are plenty of good franchises out there, and from the outside, they look very similar to the terrible ones. The good franchises are generally harder to get into, but people can often get into the lower quality franchises quite easily and seem to make the mistake of assuming they are getting the same quality, even when in some cases they aren't, or assuming that all franchises are basically the same. Now, this is one of the reasons why lower quality franchisors will often do things like force sites to refit on a regular basis to the latest company brand and image, even when franchisees can't afford it. Because from the outside, this keeps up appearances that they are a successful franchise brand, and franchisees can afford to always be upgrading their sites, even though these franchisees are often sending themselves broke trying to do it. And thirdly, I guess I would say that a lot of franchisors invest a lot of money into slick sales teams external brokerage agencies, and marketing themselves selling franchises, which is generally at the expense of the marketing fund to keep selling new franchises to new franchisees. Next question. Why do you think so many franchisors have ethics problems? Well, from what I've seen, there are two big issues at play. Firstly, there are the franchisors who never had any sense of ethics to begin with and would probably sell their own mothers for a buck. Secondly, there are those that progressively lose their ethics as they try to survive and inevitably find that the easiest people to screw over are their franchisees, and often to a lesser extent, their own head office team. Or they may just become so jaded that they start seeing franchisees as the enemy. Whichever way it happens, in my experience, they are simply prioritizing their own survival and believe that screwing people over is essential for their survival, and generally even extrapolate that out to believe it's a normal part of business. However, in my experience, this is actually detrimental, especially in the long run. Franchising is essentially the franchisor going into business with a lot of business partners, who are, of course, the franchisees. Now, if the majority of the business partners think or realize that the leader, which is, of course, the franchisor, can't be trusted, lacks morals and ethics, and is against them or out to use and abuse them, then the partnership is never going to go well in the long term. The proof of this for me is that several times now I've stepped into salvage franchisors who were able to convince me that they'd got themselves into trouble because they were naive and made mistakes, which was partly true, but also, as I found out later on, they were also completely lacking in morals and ethics. And after getting their entire network, including franchisor and franchisees, into a really good, highly profitable position with strategic, quality, ethical improvements in operations, they then took over and took things back to their morally bankrupt ways and very quickly got themselves back into trouble again. Franchisees walked away, locations closed, prospective franchisees were warned off, revenue fell across the board, locations could no longer be sold, the good quality head office support people progressively left, franchisees refused to pay fees, franchisees and others began suing, authorities started taking action over a whole range of issues, and ultimately the networks returned to being absolute pariahs. Ethical operation is good business practice, especially when you need your business partners and team to come on a journey with you. It may not provide the quick wins of screwing people over, but it does provide the long-term success. Okay, next question. Got this from a few people in the industry. Were you talking about my franchise in any of those examples? Well, to everybody that asked this, yes, no, and maybe. It was interesting how many people tried to guess which franchise was behind some of the examples, where I specifically avoided mentioning names to protect the innocent and, in most cases, the not so innocent. In some cases, it was almost amusing to see different franchises that people put forward and often attached to the same example because the themes were sadly so common. However, in some cases, people were definitely correct in who I was referring to, and in other cases, it could have just as easily been dozens of others as well. But if I said I was not going to divulge specifics, then I'm sticking to that, and that is a not so subtle attempt to preserve my own life. Next question. With the new franchising code of conduct coming in, will this make much difference? Now, maybe a little bit. This has actually just come in now. It will probably help within the Australian market to provide a little bit more disclosure in certain areas, which is always good. Remove some so-called unfair franchise agreement clauses that only apply in a minimal number of franchisees circumstances anyway, and provide for threats of bigger fines and penalties for franchisors. But realistically, dodgy franchisors can drive trucks through the gaps and still get away with murder if they are so inclined. It is primarily a political stunt, of which the current Australian government has made many in its attempts to look like it is doing things for the little Aussie battlers and making it appear as though everybody else is to blame for the deteriorating situation in the country, which is hurting individuals and businesses alike. The changes are mostly technical, bureaucratic, small print. Although I am sure the ACCC will be out there trying to look like they are saving the world by going after franchisors who don't get the technicalities right, which will mostly be small and medium-sized franchisors who don't necessarily spend massive amounts of money on their own in-house legal departments. I somehow doubt the ACCC will have the courage to go after the franchisors that really deserve it. And at the same time, the larger franchisors that do spend massive amounts of money on large in-house legal departments to get the technicalities right, in many cases will be taking away from other services that would actually benefit franchisees. Okay, next question. Why do you think so many franchisees are paying staff cash in hand? Now, this isn't really specific to franchising as such, but it references a comment I made in relation to prospective franchisees looking to buy an existing franchise location, needing to ensure that the labour figures included in provided financials are accurate and reflect staff being paid at lawful rates, or where that may not actually be the case at present, ensuring that this is allowed for in the budgeting process. In fact, many staff in some franchise locations may not even be paid on the books at all and may be working for cash in hand. So when people ask why this is, well, the truth is that I guess there are several factors at play. Firstly, it is really common in the small business within Australia just because it is really difficult for small business to survive. So desperation is a big factor. There are also big demands for staff wanting to work cash in hand for many reasons, such as avoiding tax, keeping their welfare benefits, just trying to survive, or foreign students and visa holders in particular who want to work more than their maximum allowable hours and often need to in order to survive themselves. So let's not kid ourselves that this is all driven by franchisees. It is often equally, if not more, driven by the demands of staff, especially in sectors where franchises are common, such as the hospitality, QSR, fast food, and retail sectors. Then there is the fact that there are a lot of franchisees who come in from countries with much more flexible labour laws and a lot of staff who also come in from these countries. So it is business as usual for many of these people to be paying cash in hand. Then, from the franchisor side, they are often happy to turn a blind eye because it can compensate for their struggling franchise business models. And I've seen some franchisors who even encourage it. Now, I'm certainly not saying that any of this makes it right, but it is a reality. And I think I mentioned in the Buyer Beware presentation, I've come across some franchisors operating networks of more than 100 sites who have 80 to 90% of their franchisees with significant and obvious discrepancies in their labour arrangements. And the franchisors knew this and made very conscious decisions to look the other way and instead focus on trying to maintain plausible deniability, which incidentally used to work, but after changes in recent years doesn't work so well now, as Fair Work, which is the government agency enforcing labour laws in Australia, can go after franchisors for their franchisees' labour improprieties. Now, a few questions and a bit of feedback on podcast technicalities. Now, I certainly made no secret of the fact that I had limited technical expertise when it came to creating a podcast, and that I sound like Oscar the Grouch with a head cold. But nonetheless, I do really appreciate the advice and suggestions of people who have a lot more experience than me in these areas. And anyway, a few of the common questions and feedback I received. Will you be doing interviews? Possibly in the future, I guess. However, there are a lot of other podcasters already doing this at present, and they do it really well. I really didn't want to replicate that and wanted to provide something a bit different, which is why I went with a presentation style format based on topics that I'm frequently asked for information on. Next. Have you thought of doing shorter clips and breaking up content over several videos to get more clicks? Yes, I'm aware that in order to get the most clicks, shorter presentations are the way to go. And by splitting up what was nearly a 4-hour presentation into 7 or 8 shorter presentations, I could be receiving 7 to 8 times more clicks. I know this is a good podcasting strategy and definitely makes sense from an algorithmic perspective. However, my focus was a bit different. I really want to keep the information together in one presentation and make it as in-depth as possible, assuming that the audience is most likely quite serious about what they are listening to and will continue to listen even though it isn't necessarily short and catchy. If people want to watch in smaller doses, they can start and stop, and the timestamps hopefully made this a bit easier for them. I'm not looking to monetize this or anything, and the topics are far too niche to get large enough audiences anyway. So it's just about delivering detail to the smaller audiences which are heavily invested into the topics. However, eventually the plan is to do some bite-sized stuff and mix it up a bit. So it will come, and thank you again for the feedback. Next. Why don't you make the camera shot of yourself bigger, as we can barely see you? And that's because I have absolutely no desire for my image to be any bigger than it currently is. Perfect world, I would leave the camera off altogether. Next. Sound quality and pitch fluctuated a fair bit. Would you like help with this? Yes, I did need help with this. I did notice it when I put all the pieces together. Definitely something I need to work on. Although, in fairness to myself, I did get stuck in hospital for 2 months in the middle of recording, so that accounts for a fair bit of the variation. Otherwise, a massive thank you to Blake, who gifted me a much more professional microphone setup that you may be able to see in the bottom of the screen if you're watching in a video format. Okay, that's it for the technical questions and feedback, but one more question. Do you consider you're biting the hand that feeds you? Got this a few times, and I appreciate that most people said this with a genuine concern for my own financial well-being. Doing free podcasts that expose the industry's dirty little secrets is not going to necessarily help get highly lucrative consultancy gigs with those same franchisors. However, I'm not really concerned. I'm passionate about the franchise industry, but I'm also very passionate about doing it right. Franchising needs to be a win-win situation. For the franchisor to truly win, the franchisees must also win, and they must win first. Any other way is short-sighted and ultimately doomed to failure at some point, as far as I'm concerned. For the franchise industry as a whole to win, there needs to be more of those franchisors doing the right thing by franchisees and less of those franchisors that believe in screwing franchisees over as the way to move forward. In terms of the hands that feed me, I only want to be fed and in turn support those franchisors with morals and ethics, not the others. If that means less work and options, then I'm okay with that. I won't lie, a couple of times I've been drawn in and tricked into working with unethical franchisors previously. Obviously, I regret having assisted them. Do I feel I owe them anything for that? Hell no. They got good value out of me, and they used me as much as they used and abused their franchisees. and other people that work for them as well. It's all they know how to do. Please keep in mind, though, what I mean by ethical is simply that the franchisor tries to do the right thing by people. That's not a very high bar to achieve. So the only people who I'm really against are the ones that intentionally try and do the wrong thing by their franchisees or people in general. They know who they are. And then lastly, not so much a question as feedback. You're a f***wit. The abuse. Only a very small percentage of the communications received. I knew I would upset some people who don't like their tricks, cons, and traps being exposed and talked about. I actually thought it'd be a lot more. Anyway, thanks for sharing your opinion. Don't care. Finally, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at info@fmssupportservices.com.au for a personalised, confidential, and definitely free response. Otherwise, if the option is available at the point of download, please feel free to leave any comments or questions in the comments section or on Facebook or LinkedIn, where you may have found this link, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you download your podcasts from. There are plenty more presentations coming up and lots of short tips and tidbits being shared on Facebook and LinkedIn for both franchisees and small business owners, as well as those on the franchisor side. If you have any suggestions or requests for topics, please let us know and we will add them to the list. If you found this useful, please leave us a positive review and a 5-star rating, as it will assist the algorithms in sharing this with other people that may find it useful as well. Otherwise, if you know anybody that may benefit directly, please feel free to share this link. And finally, thank you for watching or listening, and I will speak to you again soon.